I have a couple of quick reminders from my end before we dive into questions you may have. So I just want to remind everyone of our different formats that we have to engage. We have the weekly office hours that you're at right now that occurs every week from 8 to 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. And then we also have our office hours for APAC. We'll have our session this Wednesday, and that occurs monthly on the second Wednesday of each month from 4 to 5 p.m. Then on alternating Wednesdays, we have our Python development office hours and Java development office hours. So if you're looking to dive in a bit more, be able to help with items, or you have in-depth questions, that's really the best time to be able to join. And that's from 9 to 9:30 every other Wednesday for each of those respective areas. So just a couple of other announcements before we dive in. On our blog, we have a couple of updated blogs that I want to call out. We did a case study with Prezi, and so there's a really kind of workaround that they have figured out, a just good work study as well to highlight how they're using it and how they went through their AI journey with everything moving very quickly. And so it's all different videos that the teams recorded from their CEO to other engineers as well. And so recommend that you take some time to go through that. I'll drop the link to the blog all up. And then we have a highlight around our updated documentation, which brings me to our next slide. I just want to remind everyone that we do have our documentation updated. There's still a couple of other updates we'll be pushing out, but it's a really good time to be able to go through the different areas and concepts. We've broken it out by different focus areas as well. And so if you do have any feedback, feel free to also pass that along as well. And then in between these office hours, we recommend using GitHub discussions. We'd love to be able to hear your questions and feedback you have there. And we go through and triage them fairly regularly. So that's all I have from my end. I'd love to turn it over for any questions people may have. Hey, Jeevan, do you want to go ahead and come off of mute?
Yeah, let me know if you're able to hear me.
We are, yep.
All right. I had a quick question. So right now, if you look at some of the let's take the embedding model in semantic kernel, right? Two things around embedding model over there. I know I was told that it was being kind of re-engineered, but today we don't get any of the consumption information, right? Like how many tokens are used. That's not kind of bubbled up when we make the call through semantic kernel. Wanted to kind of know where things are and kind of getting that exposed out. Because if you compare and contrast to chat, right, when you call chat as a part of the metadata information, right, you do get, hey, this is the token consumption, right? But if you go on to the embedding side, it was at least not there. I haven't kind of taken a look at it in the last couple of weeks if it's been added in, but just wanted to kind of see if that where things are on that.
Yeah, so we are working on updating our embeddings interface. Let me just pull up the pull request where we're discussing that. Share that. I'll drop it in the chat. I'm less familiar. I didn't even know token. I guess token consumption for embeddings makes sense. It'd be just on the input side because there's not going to be any output. Is that right?
Yeah, pretty much, because if you look at the API as such, right, it API is returning the embedding, the how many tokens are used, right, but it's just not bubbled up beyond from the semantic layer up to the caller, Matthew.
Got it. Do you mind creating an issue so that we can track this? We're probably going to be picking up and finalizing the new embeddings interface in the next couple weeks, and we'll want to make sure that's captured.
Sure. I think I had kind of started off a question, question or something, but I don't mind kind of, I'll raise an issue on that, Matthew.
Okay. Perfect. Okay. And then, yeah.
I do have a follow-up. It's kind of, a little bit related to, right? And it's more like, for example, if you use the TGI connector for, let's say, embedding, right? So you have, in those cases, what we have kind of seen is, semantic kernel makes some assumption about how the URL is structured, right? There are certain pieces of the URL which gets kind of put in for you, right? You take the base URL, you give it the model, right? But there are certain pieces of that URL where an assumption is made and it gets added in. And I was kind of thinking whether there's any plans to kind of, allow users to maybe an overload of that method, right? Where you can kind of define the full URL over there. And I'll tell you the reasoning behind it, because if we are hosting models on our infrastructure, etc., right? We are trying to kind of see if we can have full control over the URL.
This is the URL to the endpoint of the model. Is that right?
Yes, URL to the endpoint of the model, and very specifically, there are two pieces of of the URL which kind of gets added in for TGI, Matthew, when which when you host something, right? If we either have to adhere to it, or we are kind of stuck in the water, kind of using the connector.
Yeah. So is this to do with the hugging face? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Where you. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I've run into actually this issue quite recently,
yeah.
and yeah, we should have it fixed in the next release, right? Like, I have a fix for it. I just need to create a PR for it. Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. Thanks, Mark. Yeah. Pretty much, the two pieces were, pipeline and feature extraction, right? Those are two specific, pieces of information which kind of gets added in by default. And that's, when you host it, in a different infrastructure, right? And it doesn't meet the standard, you can't use things out of the box.
Makes sense. Okay, cool. Yeah. Since like Mark is going to create a PR for that, get it fixed.
Perfect. Thanks, Jeevan. I see one in chat. I'm going to share out an issue that they were looking at from Luca. Luca, is there anything else that you want to elaborate on?
Yeah, hello. Basically, the scenario is the following one. I'm importing a plugin by using import open API. And as you know, I could have an API that expects some parameters. And imagine that a subset of these parameters are, let's say, technical parameters. So it's not something that the LLM needs to extract from the context. Rather, it's something that I want to programmatically set as a parameter of the API that I want to call. And so I thought that maybe putting this parameter into the kernel arguments would allow the semantic kernel to automatically map these kernel arguments to the payload of the request API. Instead, I have seen that it doesn't work in this way. Basically, what I've seen that the LLM extract all the parameters that the API expect from the context. So I don't think this is, in my scenario, good, because basically these are technical parameters and I want that this parameter respects some format. And also because I think that in this way I could be subjected to some prompt injection attack, since maybe someone could try to put into my prompt some of these technical parameters. So to recap, my question is, there is a way to set programmatically some parameters that I need to pass to a plugin that is imported as an API. I don't know if it's clear.
Yeah. So today it's unfortunately not possible. There's another issue we created in the past that I just put in the chat. So I'll probably move over. I'll probably close one of them as a dupe. Yours has a little bit more information and context. So I'll probably close the original one and move over my content. It is part of the graduation of Open API plugins. Because today you could achieve this with native functions using dependency injection. But as you're finding out, there's not another way of programmatically injecting this information. In the meantime, to unblock yourself, you may need to, instead of importing the Open API spec, writing a native function that just makes those REST calls, and then using dependency injection to get that information programmatically. It might be a while before we get this fixed. The person that was working on the graduation of Open API plugins, they were pulled to work on the new Azure OpenAI updates to 2.0. That'll be wrapping up in, I believe, a week or two, and then we'll start working on these items again.
Okay.
Yeah, so I've
Oh,
just
Mark?
got one addition on top of what Matthew said. I had a chat with Sergey earlier on today about this issue, and we've come up with a couple of different options. And the first one we're going to try and implement is to write a method where you can transform a plugin from one form into a different form, right? And in the new form, so if my plugin had a function like get weather that took say 2 parameters, in the new form, what we would do is we would hide one of the parameters because we know that's the one we want to provide ourselves, and allow the other one potentially to be advertised to the LLM, or you could say, I don't want anything advertised to the LLM, and then basically overwrite the delegate so that when the function gets called, you can basically add the new kernel arguments that you want yourself, right? And we're going to try that as build it as a sample. And if that works, that might unblock you as a short-term solution. But we do want to work on as Matthew said, a kind of like a longer-term solution to make it easy to solve this type of problem. Because yeah, this does keep coming up, So.
Okay.
So
Thank you a lot,
yeah.
guys.
Yeah. I expect to have something probably on Monday, and I'll reach out to you on Monday then with a response if we can get anything going.
Great. Thanks a lot.
Great, thanks for the question. I see we have a hand up. Would love if you want to come off of mute.
Yeah. This is maybe I'm not sure if this is a simple question, but for auto invoke kernel functions, I vaguely recall there being a way for that to be done without LLM function calling. So without actually doing like the tool calling, API through Open API or whatever. Maybe I'm just wrong and that never existed, but is all kernel function invocation done through LLM function calling at this point?
I would say the valuable part of semantic kernel all kind of pass through that in some sort of fashion. You could, like, if you just have a kernel function, or if you have a plugin, you have access to it, you could do, let's say it's weather plugin. Weather plugin, I believe it's like you could get the first function, get weather, and then you could do I believe it's invoke async, and you can invoke it yourself.
Okay.
If you are, I would say, if that's all you're doing and you're not having the LLM like choose, pick, and invoke a function, you might not be needing semantic kernel at that point. I'm curious what your scenario is where you're wanting to invoke these functions without using tool calling.
Mainly just getting some of that handlebars planner functionality where I don't need to use function, or at least I have like a fixed steps, like 2 or 3 steps, and then I can invoke those. But that doesn't actually rely on the tool calling. That relies on, I think, that handlebars native, however they do it.
Can you elaborate on, because what you're describing is like, oh, I have a plan and I want to run these steps. What we've seen a lot of customers do is if they do have a plan, they write it as like a C# function or a native code function that does the steps. It sounds like, though, you want like a simpler way of writing these plans. Is that right?
Meaning I want a way where before we take, let's say, a user's request is going to require invoking 4 functions to accomplish it. I want a way to display all 4 of those functions in their order, and have the user say like, okay, I'm going to run this plan. Pretty much what handlebars was doing. I know that handlebars is going to get deprecated, the plan, or it's already deprecated now. So I was just wondering, like, is everything done now through tool calling pretty much? Because then the one issue with tool calling is we don't know the next function we want to call until we call our first function, read the response, then the LLM chooses, oh, I want to call another function, or oh, I want to go back to the user.
Okay, sure. Okay, I get it. So this is more, hey, I want to see the entire plan so that I can get approval from the user for proceeding.
Yeah, and maybe the user wants to do some other actions. Maybe they want to tweak the plan. So maybe they want to say, oh, actually, for step 4, use this function, or for step 4, do this. That kind of workflow.
Got it. Okay, so but yes, the handlebars planner we're planning on removing it from the repo at some point because it just wasn't, from our testing, what customers were telling us, it just wasn't as effective for the generic use case.
Mm-hmm.
We are moving towards using like Python as that intermediate language.
Right.
That we finally have an engineer starting to work on that now. I don't expect we would have something to start playing with in the next like month or so.
Okay.
In the meantime, you can continue using the existing handlebars thing if it was working for you. And then when the new Python planner, for lack of a better term, comes out, there'll be a migration guide.
Okay. Also, I guess I have 2 more follow-up questions to that. One is there a plan for C#? Like a C# version of that planner? Or will we need to make Python?
So just like how the handlebars planner was like cross-language, and
Yeah.
handlebars was just the language that the LM used, the Python planner will be the same way. It's just the language that the LM uses. So that will work across all of the 3 different SDKs.
Okay. And then the other question sort of in this line is in semantic functions or prompt functions, can we still embed native functions in that template? And so like, for example, if I want to get a variable via a plugin function, I remember with the handlebars templates, you can just put like the curly braces, put the name of the registered function. Does that still work?
Yes, and just to be clear, the only thing that's going away is the handlebars planner.
Okay,
So asking the LM to generate handlebars templates effectively.
Okay.
The handlebars template rendering engine, that will continue to exist. The liquid version will continue to exist. The internal semantic kernel one will still exist. So you can still use those to do exactly what you described.
Great. Thank you.
Okay. And I saw there was like a follow-up question by Tristan in the chat. Can I ask what was deficient with handlebars? It's probably worth like understanding, like recapping like how these models are created. It's like, oh, we want a bunch of training data. We should have it in there. And then the model knows how to do something. So the reason why we chose handlebars is it was a language, technically it's a templating language that had broad support across all languages. So for us, it was C#, Java, and Python. The problem is when we asked the LM, hey, generate a plan or a series of steps using handlebars, it just didn't have enough training data in its hive mind thing in order to actually generate a very sequential programmatic template. Because most of the time when you use handlebars, it's more like rendering HTML or something kind of like static, right? And so there just wasn't enough training data for the LLMs, even if you're using GPT-4, to really generate a handlebars plan that was as good as one would hope, right? And so what we had to do on the semantic kernel side is we had these system prompts that just kept growing and growing and growing. And we started getting feedback that, oh, the handlebars planner is slow, or hey, it's not accurate. It's not achieving what I wanted to do. And so we were stuck. Either we made it more accurate, which means making the prompt even larger and making it more expensive, or we tried shrinking this and the accuracy fell. What other research teams within Microsoft found, though, is Python, these models were much better at writing, which just intuitively makes sense because there's going to be a lot more Python code out there. And the reason why we're going to go with Python first over a C#, over JavaScript, over any other programming language, is the humans that made these models, AI researchers, ML researchers, they all write Python. And so I like to joke that these LLMs were basically when they were little babies, they were being trained on Python. And so there's no better language for these LLMs to write than Python. And so from our own internal testing, we are getting much more accurate plans with Python. We're seeing the same results as our counterparts in research. And so we believe the prompts required for the LN to generate plans will become much tighter, much smaller. And because there's so much, like exponentially more training data that the models have on writing Python scripts, it's going to be much more accurate right out of the box. Okay. So hopefully that answered your question.
It does. Yeah, thanks.
Kind of moving forward.
Yeah, and I mean, I've had really good luck using handlebars just as a way of just handling variables, for lack of a better word. And so that's why I wanted to prod it, I guess, is that it still, for me, feels like the best way to kind of identify a variable in a prompt. But
and that is going nowhere. So if you're just
right.
using it for prompt templates for variables, double thumbs up. What I love about Handlebar's templating language and the Liquid templating language is you have loops. You can support complex objects. So like these things have value. It's just not good for everything.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Thanks a lot.
Perfect.
Yeah, I think the one other thing to know is with automatic function calling, you have the power of all the different models as well moving forward. And so that's another thing as you're moving for some of these items from handlebars to other solutions as well. There's a lot of power that you'll be able to get as well. I see a couple in chat. Oh, go for it, Matthew.
I was just going to say every day some other model has automatic function or function calling support, which is great. Okay, go for it, Sophia.
Yeah, there was a question chat from John around Anthropic and having the chat completion service in Semantic Kernel. Is there a good timeline update on that?
So thank you, Evan, for dropping in the links. So we do have the two issues. As Evan mentioned, it's on the backlog for Python. On the .NET side, we are working with a community member, Christoph, to create it. So if Christoph's on this call, I don't think he normally joins, but thank you. He was the same person that built the Gemini connector for .NET. And so we're working on it, and it should be done hopefully by Ignite.
Perfect. I'm not seeing other questions. Does anyone else want to come off of mute or feel free to add other items you have in chat as well?
I guess I have one completely different question to my first question. We're trying to get the LLM to produce an explanation of something. So like, there's code or I don't know, some technical explanation. And I was just wondering if there's any guidance anybody has found on just like grading that explanation. Like we looked at like, and maybe this is a little off topic, I'm not sure, but just like a random challenge we found. Like we looked at using things like I think it's like the Flesch Kinsed, like different grammatical metrics for evaluating text. But I was wondering if anybody had found success with like specific metrics or something.
Yeah, what you're talking about is evaluations.
Yeah.
And these are evaluations where you don't have benchmark data for like what the correct answer is. Is that right?
Right.
Okay, so I know I know PromptFlow had a few like out of the box evaluations. I'm curious if any of those could be used. The one that you mentioned, is it using a model or is it just like some sort of algorithm?
We were trying to avoid having our test suite require LLM calls if we could. But I mean, that's definitely an option, and it sounds like that's probably the way to go. But I was wondering if there's objective metrics, because even then, we have some fuzziness about whether or not the LLM's output is actually accurate. We'd like some objective metrics in addition to LLM output.
So I am not aware of anything that doesn't use a model.
Okay.
Because it's so you use the word fuzzy, but the output of these models is so fuzzy that if you could probably do some like keyword matching, like if you ask a question about like a .NET better appear in the answer, but like that's not going to tell you if it's accurate or not.
Right.
I am going to drop in the chat the kind of out of the box open source evaluations that PromptFlow has.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead and just share my screen. There's a few in here. Let's see. Some of these look somewhat relevant too. That one's not what you care about. Entity match rate. Let's see, what is this? Oh, so this is kind of like this is when it has a ground truth. So that's not what you want. Here's one where it uses a prompt to basically ask, hey, given this question and the answer in this context, provide a score on the perceived intelligence. So you may have to do something like this in order to get an answer.
Cool. This is all really helpful. It was more of just a general question, so thank you.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Perfect. Thanks for the question.
I was just going to chime in on that. So I've done a fair amount of work on this where I started looking at the prompt flow evaluations, and I found that they're certainly useful for getting your head in the space quickly, but I never wanted to evaluate with just one of them. Like I always wanted to evaluate on many criteria at once, and I wanted to form as strong of a picture of the quality of the answer as possible across many dimensions. So it's basically feeding the entire thing that needed to be evaluated, and then generating a fairly rich object that would, using variables to say, assess this on these criteria, assess, score this, etc. And what I find is that if something has been hallucinated, passing it back, like in the original response, passing it back through the evaluations flow isn't especially good at detecting the hallucination unless you're able to provide it with the ground truth. So if that's what you're trying to achieve with the evaluation, it's good to temper your expectations there. But being able to introspect on what it's done, I find it does really well. Being able to evaluate against a ground truth, if you've got one, I find it does really well. Generating scores when in conjunction with all of this, like getting it to write out its rationale for how it has evaluated something is really helpful. But if you ask it to generate a score, I find the scoring is extremely arbitrary. And the only real value I take from it is if it's a low score, I know it's unconfident in its verdict. But if it's a high score, I find that's really, really fuzzy and unreliable.
Gotcha. Okay.
That is very helpful. Because to be honest, I haven't played too much around with these evaluation techniques myself. I did see at one point there was an open source project where they actually shipped a bunch of like fine-tuned models for evaluations to get that numbered score. That was several months ago. So now I'm curious if there's other fine-tuned models that would provide more accurate scores than just asking a 3.5 turbo to rank something from 0 to 4. So I'd recommend investigating that as well.
I think the primary challenge with getting accurate scoring is that you're normally going to be feeding it like a previously generated answer at a time. So every one of those scorings is done in isolation. So like all of the arbitrariness of generation comes to bear on each one of those scores. Whereas like, you know, if you're asking it to write out a paragraph about how it's arrived at the score, that's so much more useful than the number, even though what we'd really want is the number. But I guess what I would really encourage you to do is just write it. Like, don't write out exactly what you want, you know, and don't worry so much about sticking to examples or whatever. Like, it just does an extremely good job of following your instructions for evaluations and giving you its thoughts about what it sees.
Great. This is very helpful. Thank you.
Agreed. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Tristan, for adding that insight. I see a couple of really good comments in chat from Rory. Just want to give you an opportunity to come off mute before I move on to the next question, if you'd like.
Yeah, I think I agree with everything that said. In the evaluation projects we've done, a mix is best. So a couple of LLM as judge metrics, a couple of those classic, you know, word style. There's also a BERT score one where instead of pure words, you're taking the embeddings of the response and the embedding of the ground truth, seeing how far it is. I hear you, you don't have ground truth, but there are some ways to generate ground truth that you might look at. So I agree with Tristan, you need a mix. That's it. Thanks, Sophie.
Perfect. Thanks, Rory. I see a really good question from Luca. Luca, do you want to come off of mute?
No, just to ask if there is an update about this example. I remember that in the past, one of the participant asked about an example of integrating semantic kernel into an API, and I remember you said that you were maybe working on to publish an example for this. And since I was interested, especially into the streaming scenario, just to see if there is some best practice to implement these APIs, I would be interested in. Also, because there could be several options to implement this kind of streaming APIs.
On it. So we haven't been able to get to this on our backlog yet. I know Sophia's working with the .NET team to build out a sample using the eShop stuff. I'm assuming you're in .NET land, is that right?
Yep.
Yep. Sophia, I know we just had a meeting on that. We don't know timelines on when that's supposed to be done. Is that right?
Yeah, we're hoping the middle of August to be able to have it released out, but we're actually meeting later today to sit down and evaluate the timeline as well. But I can provide you with an update, Luca, in next week's office hours if you pop in to see how much time we're thinking it's going to take. But there is an existing eShop, it just doesn't have some of the functionality they're looking for as well. And so that does have a good starting point, but we should have an update in the next month for you.
Thank you.
In regards to streaming in particular, what I've done in the past is I like to kind of, how do I want to answer this? So with the open AI APIs, the way streaming works is like a streaming HTTP call back with a bunch of tokens. And that just kind of goes across the wire. You could, of course, also use something like SignalR or WebSocket to stream this information back. If you don't need like the cross communication, which I don't think you do, I think just the streaming HTTP call back, kind of like modeling it, what OpenAI has done is sufficient. But if you're expecting like very rapid, hey, user starts a chat and sends it back and the AI responds, you might want to do WebSockets, but then you have to maintain these things and that can be a headache. Do you know if there are other patterns you were investigating?
No, actually, I worked in the direction that you said. I mean, by using SignalR for bidirectional communication, or as you said, HTTP streaming API. So, yeah, it's the two solutions that I consider and I explored.
Got it. I would say if you can get away with the HTTP streaming, it's probably less of a headache. Because once you start scaling, dealing with like WebSockets and making sure that they get connected right,
Agree.
can start becoming annoying. But if you do envision a future where you need this like quick bidirectional communication, getting WebSockets or Signal R working now will save you a lot of headache of refactoring in the future.
Okay, great, thanks.
And I guess on the engineering team from the semantic kernel side, is my answer correct?
No, but thanks.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Dimitro has done some work in this area. Like now he's out at the moment, right? But I'm going to talk to him next week, and I'll get him to reach out with some additional information because I think we might have a working sample of this somewhere. Yeah.
Awesome, thanks.
Oh yeah. It's not in the semantic kernel repo. It's like in some other thing. Yeah, if we can find that, that'd be great to share while Sophia works on the new sample.
Absolutely, that'd be great. Not seeing any other questions in chat. Does anyone else want to come off of mute with our remaining time and ask anything? If there are no other questions, we can end office hours early, but I'll give it a minute or two more just to make sure no one's typing in the background. Great. Well, thanks everyone for joining this week's office hours. We really appreciate your time, and thanks to everyone on the Semantic Kernel team as well. And we'll see you again next week. Bye, everyone.
Cheers. Bye.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.